Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade.
We chronicled the distinct memories of our childhood in our book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America in the 1950s, which takes you on a notably historic journey through that often forgotten decade. We also want to hear about your experiences during the 1950s. We will feature guests whose special stories of that decade will bring to mind magical moments of reflection, some with tears, some with smiles, but above all, a good dose of laughter.
We would like you to chat with us as we bring to mind the sights and sounds so familiar to that time in history. Grab your favorite malt or Green River, make sure you are wide awake, and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, friends. So glad that you're joining us again on another week of the 1950s Fun Chat. Jackie and I have a lot of fun recording the memories of others from that particular decade in so long ago. And we have another guest today, which I think you will again find interesting. Jackie, lead us into our conversation today with our guest.
Well, first of all, we have a little housekeeping duties, and that is I would like to have our viewers take a look at your screen. Peruse that screen and notice that on the bottom, you'll see a purple banner. It is the website that we would like to have you go to, which is called www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. This will give you all sorts of information about our book and about the authors and where it can be purchased. Now, speaking of book, look at the upper right-hand corner. You'll see a beautiful North Dakota sunset that wraps around the book, While the Windmill Watched, a slice of rural America. And you'll also notice there's a silhouette of two little girls and, of course, the windmill, which is a very important feature in our book. Also, down at the corner there, you'll see a little bit of a little white item. And that tells you about our most recent award. We have been dubbed, this was the worldwide contest. We have been dubbed the very distinct favorite, with a distinguished favorite in regional category. That means that we talk about one region and it became a favorite of the judges. So check that out too. We have an exciting guest with us today. And I think viewers, if you have been following the 1950s Fun Chat, you will find our guest, Mary Selecky, a little bit familiar because she has been on our program before. So today's program is a continuation of chat number 25 with Mary, and you are urged to review that program. As a refresher, I'll begin with a brief introduction of Mary. Mary Selecky grew up in coal mine country in northeast Pennsylvania. She was born in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, in 1947 into a closely knit family of 7 children residing in Glen Lyon, Pennsylvania. Mary graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science. After graduation, with her degree and her intellectually curious mind, she became an assistant dean of students, both at the Sarah Lawrence College and at the University of Pennsylvania. Since 1974, Mary has lived in northeastern Washington near Colville. So, Mary, we're so grateful and pleased to have you here again. Thank you for joining us and sharing your 1950s memories.
You're welcome. And this has been fun to think about the 1950s and listen to other stories from the 50s, because on the one hand, there are a lot of things that are similar, but it varies depending on where you grew up.
Yes, yes.
So no matter the decade, 50s, 40s, whatever, music has been an influence in a young person's life, whether it be from the phonograph or the radio, vocal artists or bands of all sizes. However, the new influence in the 1950s was the television. And if a family in the 1950s had a television set, American Bandstand was the hot program for the youth of America from 1952 to 1989. So tell us, what are some memories of that show? and their influences, as well as other influences of music in the 1950s for you.
Well, a couple things. One is that I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania, which in the 1950s, before the Turnpike was about a 4-hour drive to Philadelphia. And Bandstand came from Philadelphia. So it felt like it was a very familiar kind of thing because my older brothers and sisters went to school in Philadelphia in the 50s. And our family didn't have a television until about 1955. So in order to see it in the early years, we had to go over to a friend's house, and that got to be real old. And I think my dad got the idea he better keep us home, and he got a television for us.
Yeah.
Bandstand used to feature mostly rock and roll and a lot of singers from the Philadelphia area, people like Frankie Avalon and Bobby Rydell and Chuck Berry, and they became familiar names to us. And teenagers are screamers when they see anybody who's famous. And we learned that when the Beatles came to Washington, to the United States, but we were screamers then too. And I have to tell you about a trip a group of us girls took to Philadelphia. We didn't actually go on the Bandstand set, but Dick Clark did a presentation, and there was this big auditorium filled with screaming Mimi teenagers. We thought it was the best thing in the world. And he actually shook my girlfriend's hand, and she was going to never wash her hand again.
That is so funny. I've never heard from anyone who was directly involved with American Bandstand or with Dick Clark. This is so neat. For us, I remember coming home from country school I believe it was usually on a 4:00 Central Time.
Right.
And we'd turn that on, and I'd love to watch the dancers rock and roll. And also too, how the fashions that were worn by teenage young women then played a part, really imprinted on my mind, and made me, as I got to be a little older, made me want to have those same circle skirts or bobby socks and go from there.
And amazingly, the boys wore shirts and ties, and some of them even wore jackets. It was so much more formal than how we even go to concerts now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm. Did the boys do any screaming too, or was it just the girls?
Oh, it was usually just the girls. And the boys couldn't have been bothered to take a trip down to Philadelphia to see Dick Clark. They were very excited about that. But they copied the hairstyles of the boys on American Bandstand.
Oh.
That DA kind of look, that slicked back, and then these curls that would come down over their forehead.
Yes.
And was it the duck hairstyle? They had a duck in the back, the hair kind of flipped up like a duck.
That's what the DA was.
Okay.
Oh, DA or duck what?
Think about it.
DA. Oh.
Okay. Well, Mary, were you a screamer too?
Well, sure, you had to, you got so excited that you almost missed seeing the person because you were screaming your head off. The other thing about music was in the 50s, I had an older brother, I had 3 older siblings, and one graduated in 55, one in 56, and one in 59. And the one who graduated in 59 brought rock and roll into the house, but he could only play it on his 45 player, the 45 RPM. My dad would not let him put those records onto the family Victrola, because that was for classical music. So it was a real interesting thing to hear rock and roll coming out of my brother John's room while the rest of us were listening to opera on Saturday mornings broadcast from New York or classical music.
Did your parents ever relinquish and really tend to enjoy rock and roll?
Oh, as time came, because it was so repetitious, the music then, and there weren't like tons of stars, and you had to buy those 45 records. I mean, they made sure we had a record player and all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, and then drove us to some of those events.
Wow.
Wow.
What great parents. Again, great parents.
Yeah. And thinking about music and stuff, my sister and I and some of our friends took tap dance lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there was so much independence for local television stations that they produced their own shows. And we were on the local television dressed up in our little outfits, tap dancing away on television. And that was also, music was involved in our lives like that.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Super. Well, we mentioned your parents, and so I know that your father was an elected official. So tell us a little bit about his pre political life, as well as how did the campaigning and the subsequent elections affect you and your siblings?
Well, my dad was a lawyer, and he was very involved in community. He served in the Second World War, actually in Chicago, and he got very involved in the American Legion and was the state commander in the early 1950s. And I think part of doing that launched him into thinking about what he would do besides a law practice in town. And he was approached by one of the local parties, the Republican Party, to become their candidate for judge. And at the time, there were 6 of us kids, and my mother was newly pregnant with my brother Peter. So we would all pile into a car and go to what were called clam bakes on the weekends, or church picnics, or to the local amusement park when it was Slovak Day or some other special day. We all carried signs, and my father's slogan was "Select Selecky, a family man for a family court," because that's the court he was running to. But we were all involved. It wasn't about parades and things. It was really about pressing the flesh, as it were, meeting people, introducing yourself, talking to them, hearing what their concerns were.
Mhm.
Okay.
How was that an influence in your life then?
Well, I campaigned when I was 10 years old, and that kind of never got out of my blood. And actually, my father unfortunately died at a very young age. And the name Selecky was very, very well known in our communities. And my mother ran for an elected office, so we all worked on her campaign also. And she eventually was the township tax collector. Believe it or not, people would come to the house and pay their taxes to make it convenient for people to do that.
Uh-huh.
And so as I went to college and studied political science, I started to expand my understanding of all of that. And I'll tell you, that particular family experience, and also then the studies that I had, I really loved working in government. I had a summer job working for the county commissioners one summer when I was home. This was in Pennsylvania again, in Luzerne County, and really enjoyed working for those elected officials that really were running the county. And I quickly surmised that I, working there, had more ease to wander around the courthouse than the kids who were either running the elevator or working in the treasurer's office or something.
Sure.
So I said, okay, learn that, girl, that if you're going to set your sight on something, make sure you hook up with those who are going to make the decisions.
Mhm.
Very important understanding for
Yeah,
Yes.
when I came to Colville, and really we're to talk about the 50s, but just to finish answering your question,
Mhm.
there were no universities or colleges here for me to work at. So I took a job in local government, and have worked in local government for 25 years and then in state government for 15 years. So I've used those life experiences as well as educational learning all throughout my career.
Yes.
Mhm. And that local government has to do with healthcare, by the way. And you and other members of your family have been in healthcare. And if you want to give us the specifics about that, please do. But there are probably too many ways in which healthcare has changed today from the decade of the 50s. And so, what main topics come to mind when you think of the differences? So that's the last question. The first part, tell us about your healthcare career.
Well, I am not healthcare educated. I am healthcare learned. And I had great mentors and teachers in terms of nurses and doctors and public health officials across this state and in my own community who kind of guided me along the way. I truly fell in love with public health because it touches every person every day, whether it's the clean water you drink, the safe food that you eat when you go out, the handling of your septage and sewage, the communicable disease that can be prevented by immunizations. It's always affecting your life, whether you know it or not, using seat belts, putting babies in car seats, etc. And I really did fall in love with it. But I think it was growing up in that small community where you learned that you needed to also rely on the resources that are local. I grew up in a small town, and our family doctor actually went to school with my dad, Doc Stopinski, and his first name I think was Stanley, but he was Doc Stopinski, and he made house calls, and there were 3 of us kids right in a row. And if one of us got sick, he'd say to the other 2, roll over, I'm going to give you a shot of penicillin. You're going to get it. You're going to get it too. I can remember, I can picture that happening actually, one time at the house. And his office was basically in his home. He and his family lived upstairs in a flat. And if you went to his office, you didn't make appointments ahead of time. You just waited your turn. And my mother would call up and say, Mary really has got a temperature. I'm going to send her over. Can she slip in the back door? And so she doesn't have to sit in the front room. And I knew how to do that, and because she was home with all the rest of the kids, and the other thing about the 50s was that was not uncommon, for a young kid to go and go to the store by themselves with the list from your mom and pick up the groceries and not handle any money, say, put it on the bill. And somewhere along the line, the bill caught up with my parents. I don't even know how that happened, and the same thing with the doctor. I don't remember cash ever passing hands. When I was born, I actually have a receipt where my brother John saved pennies in an oatmeal box and paid for my delivery with those pennies.
Is that right?
Yeah, I have the receipt of John Selecky, oatmeal box pennies, for his sister Mary.
Yeah. And do you happen to know that cost?
Oh, I don't remember that. I would have to pull out my little receipt book. But I don't think John paid for it all.
Did the doctor have a steady nurse who worked with him?
Well, he had a helper. Okay. Yeah, so it wasn't a nurse. I don't know that the nurses were mostly you saw nurses, either a school nurse or the nurses at the hospital. But this was a, one man office, one person office. And there were in our town 3 doctors' offices like that. And in fact, our next door neighbor was a physician, Dr. Keeler, and he had a side room, but no, he didn't have a special person. He had somebody who maybe kept the books, or his wife opened the door for patients or whatever.
Was that the same practice followed when you went to the dentist also?
Pretty much. Yeah, I don't ever remember a person helping the dentist. And they were those machines with big cables, remember? In the 50s, that the drill had made a loud noise, and there was a cable that went around a little pulley, and that's how it got rotated.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Was he a friendly dentist? Did he like kids?
Well, I've been in a dental chair since I was about 3 years old. And the first time I ever went, there was a special health center up in our big town, Wilkes-Barre. And I can remember going to that dentist there first. And then Dr. Turkuski took care of all of us, and you'd go over to the dentist and just wait your turn. And there was no fluoride around, unfortunately. And to this day, it still is a major issue for me. I work very hard to make sure these are my teeth. with a little help from some crowns.
Yeah. Do you remember your parents really encouraging you to brush your teeth, or is that just something you picked up?
Well, there were so many of us. There was a routine that you had in the morning. I mean, our house had 4 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, and everybody was getting ready for school at the same time. So you had this, and we knew who had to go on the bus. And us kids going to elementary school, we walked to school up through elementary and junior high, and the bus was to take to the high school at a later age. And so there were different times when my mother would knock on the door and say, okay, your turn. And you'd go in there, and sometimes there were 3 of us brushing teeth at the same time. So there were a lot of role models to follow.
Yes.
When you're in a big family.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you go to kindergarten, Mary?
Oh, yes, I did. I was thinking about that the other day, and I don't know what popped into a friend of mine reminded me that 3 young people in my life are going to are 5 years old and will be going to kindergarten. And that got me thinking about going to kindergarten and what that was like. And I had a teacher that all my brothers and sisters had. I had a lot of those teachers. But meeting kids that I had not met before, I mean, a whole room full of people that you didn't know, and then figuring out and I had a girlfriend who lived down the street from me. So we walked to school together. And then our group expanded into the last time that we met with number 25, I think you said, number 25 interview. I talked about a club I was in, Club 7. And that all started to form as we went through those primary grades. And this would have been 1954 or 55 when I went to kindergarten. And I'm a second year baby boomer. I'm born in 1947. And our class, there were so many of us that they had to have a second classroom for the kids. So there were 2 kindergartens, 2 first grades as we went through our grades up until about 3rd grade when they had a teacher who would take all of us at once.
Oh my.
Do you recall if your parents prepared you with numerals or with reading before you went to kindergarten?
Well, there were always books in the house.
Okay.
And in fact, my sister Heidi, who was the most avid reader, she's 2 years younger, said when she was a child that she would be a librarian. And she was a university librarian for 40 years.
Wow.
But books we were read to all the time, even by the older brothers and sisters. And these books were the golden books. You might remember the outside edge had gold on it. And they're very well-worn books. And yeah, we practiced writing. And again, the older kids were there. And so we'd see them doing homework. So we'd mimic them.
Sure.
When they sat at the dining room table to do their homework, we'd get books and act like we were doing our homework.
Did you have a favorite little golden book?
The book Heidi.
Oh, okay.
We had that.
Yeah, the book Heidi for sure.
Yeah.
And it was always interesting as you got older to then read the longer version of Heidi, not just the golden book.
Right. It was kind of a thick book. I mean, thicker than Heidi.
Yeah, it was.
And it's still a classic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And my sister Heidi's real name is Ellen Mary.
Oh,
she loved that story so much that she announced that her name was now Heidi. And she would not answer to anything but Heidi. She was about 5 years old. And to this day, a 70-year-old woman is Heidi.
Yes. Well,
but that was the 50s. There was all that little exploration that you went through. Lots of bike riding, lots of hopscotch.
Did you play jacks?
Oh, yeah. And a lot of scooter. We had a scooter. But nothing was powered, of course.
Oh,
everything was powered by you.
Yes. Yes.
And did you or the boys play marbles? Was that divided into boys and girls playing marbles, or did everyone?
Oh, sometimes we got to play together. And in the schoolyard, we'd go in the dirt and make a circle with our finger, and you had a shooter.
Yep.
Yes.
And we had bags of marbles. I mean, because in between me and my sister Heidi was our brother Tommy. And so, we all had shared those kinds of games, even touch football in the backyard.
Okay. That's cool. Do you remember in school, I'm reflecting back to music now. Do you remember if you danced, if you did round dances or learned to dance a polka or a waltz or those kind of dances then?
We actually learned things like the polka and all that in all our homes. The Eastern European ethic was very, very strong in Northeast Pennsylvania. A lot of those coal miners' families came from Poland, Lithuania, Slovakia. That's where my family is from. And you'd learn to do those kinds of things at family parties and family weddings. In school, we had music teachers, Mr. Fisher, and he taught us, and this was unusual, I learned, he taught us Halloween songs. And when we would do trick or treat, you'd go to a house and you were expected to sing a Halloween song. And it wasn't until honestly, till I got to college that I realized how unique it was. because I remember being in the dorm and sang and played trick or treat and sang songs for Halloween. An old witch, believe it if you can, tapped on my window pane and ran helter skelter with her toes in the air, corn stalks flying from the old witch's hair. Went the broomstick, meow went the cat, hop went the hop toad sitting on her hap. We chuckle, what fun, Halloween night when the witches run.
Awesome.
And I didn't even practice for that. It just happened. And my whole family can do that.
Oh, that is so cool. I've not heard that song.
Well, that was in the 50s. You know, we had those golden books,
Yes,
music books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for, oh.
That was in the Golden Book?
No, that was not.
Oh,
No, Mr. Fisher used the golden book, and he used to keep time by doing this. And he'd come into our classroom, and then we'd have music for a while. And he also played the piano.
Okay. Oh, he was a gifted guy. Sounds like a fun teacher.
He was sort of.
Did you ever have a rhythm band so that children learned to count time with rhythm sticks or with sandpaper?
I don't remember doing that at all. Lots of us did take piano lessons.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, we had a piano teacher that came to the house.
Oh, nice.
When my older brothers and sisters were taking lessons, us little kids would crawl under the piano and do things like take his shoelaces out. And yeah, we couldn't stand being away from all the activity that was going on.
Uh-huh.
My dad played the piano, as did my mom, and she also played the violin some. So we were all. I played in recitals and had a companion. We did 2 piano kinds of songs and things like that. It was really fun. So music was very much a part of our lives. But no, we didn't have rhythm stuff in school, until you got to really high school. And some of my classmates are really very good instrumentalists. Young man, Al Roke, who lives in Ohio now, still is playing in a band and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's fun to reminisce about music. Music is the international language. It's every country can relate to the same music.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And some of us now know another Halloween song.
Yeah, there is such a.
I'll help you out.
Okay. I think we would in country school would Jackie remind me would we sing more about autumn and fall rather than Halloween, or then in spring? You know, we'd sing songs of spring, or Little Robin Redbreast, or that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think some of those were in the Golden Book, probably.
'Tis springtime, cold winter is past.
You know that
breezes are blowing, and May's here at last. And it went on.
Yes.
And all the birds are here again with their happy voices. Oh, that one? No. Okay.
Well, it's fun. It made school fun to be able to participate in the arts. You had book learning, but there was just something about having music or fine arts of any sorts in being exposed to that really gave a lift and made such a broad education for children of all ages when that was offered.
So as I think I mentioned that I grew up in this coal mining town when mining was still very active, and a lot of people were not very affluent. And we would raise money at the church with fish fries and things like that. And then my mom would arrange for us to go to the big town, Wilkes-Barre, and who actually would put on a ballet. So a lot of these young people in our class got exposed to much broader kinds of music, like Philharmonic and ballet, by virtue of the bus trips we could take and go and see these programs.
How wonderful that you had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's wonderful.
I was in the grade. We were able to go to a mall in the Night Visitors, and that was an operetta, and it really stuck with me. I was just mesmerized by this mall.
Yeah.
opera, operetta.
Yeah.
Opera
But
and opera.
So going back to music, don't forget it was in the 50s that this rock and roll thing came in. And there, I mean, every generation thinks that they're the hot stuff of the lifetime. Well, seeing Elvis on television was a huge deal, for example. You know, and this is pre-Beatles and all that, and other singers that I mentioned. In order to watch, you know, televisions had antennas in those days, and I lived around where there are lots of rolling hills, and our house could not get the station that Ed Sullivan was on, so I had to go over to my girlfriend's house to watch Elvis on television, and because of the way he moved around, my girlfriend's mother was appalled, so she stood in front of the television for a while.
Yes. Well, I'm thinking even going into the 60s when the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, that was our parents, particularly Dad, and it happened to be that his sister and her husband had stopped by to visit. They were just appalled that someone like that would be on TV, and the length of the hair, that was the big deal.
Yeah.
The length of the
Right.
young man's hair
But
changed America. It changed the world, really.
right, it did.
Yes.
And their songs are just they are applicable to any generation.
Yes.
Well, and we're still listening to them because we
are.
Maybe we pine for those days, but they're still very popular to hear.
Right.
And when you hear, is there a certain song that you remember from the 50s that brings back nice, warm, fuzzy memories for you?
It's stuff from like seventh grade dances, things like Blue Hawaii, where two kids would waltz, and all they did was move that way and that way and that way and that way. That's what they thought a waltz was.
I know.
Yes.
It was kind of a hoot.
Yeah.
Mary, this has been so enjoyable, and viewers, we've been visiting with Mary Selecky of Colville, Washington. She's just brought back some wonderful memories of that decade of the 1950s, where she lived in Pennsylvania. So, folks, we hope you've enjoyed this wonderful fun chat this week. And Mary, we're so thankful to have you back for round 2 of interviewing with Jackie and me on the 1950s fun chat. So we thank you, and we so look forward. Maybe there will be a round 3. What do you think?
I'll have to put my memories to work. This certainly whets the appetite for more. That's for sure.
Yes, and isn't it wonderful when we have these wonderful memories that are just imprinted on our minds of our childhood?
Yes.
Well, folks, until next time, we hope your mind will wander to that time of the 1950s of poodle skirts and malt shops and American Bandstand and Dick Clark and the music of that time, which is really pretty different than what the music of today. And that you can learn more about the 1950s on each edition of our fun chat, and even go back into the archive programs that are on our channel. This is number 41, so we've got 40 great ones ahead of that will really inspire you about that decade of the 1950s. Jackie, yep, go ahead.
Okay, I would like to invite you all to join us next week when we'll have another guest. And I want you to please look at your screen and be sure to click the little red button, the subscribe button, and then the thumbs up icon. We'd appreciate if you click that also. And we want you to tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. Do join us every week. It's live Monday night, 8 p.m. Central Time. And if you can't join us at that time, then view our YouTube program found on the 1950s Fun Chat. You may also find these fun chats on our at our website, www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. All sorts of information there. And if you go to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see 1950s Fun Chat. So select on there and you'll be able to see any one or all of the previous chats.
That's right. And they're so various. We've had just a wide variety of guests from all around the country, and even some who grew up outside of this country. So it really broadens our experiences of the 1950s. In case you want to purchase one of our books, please go to our website, and you will see where the list of vendors across this country who carry our
I
book.
have mine.
You betcha. Thank you, Mary. And if you don't have a vendor close by, the NDSU bookstore will gladly ship a book or more, one or more books to you. So remember, whilethewindmillwatch.com. We've had fun today, and we hope that you have too. So we'll see you next time on the 1950s Fun Chat. Bye-bye.